Alright guys, today I'm going to be talking about a subject that is very touchy and controversial to a lot of people, but is also very important to me. I'm going to be talking about what's usually referred to as bipolar psychosis, manic episodes, peak experiences, or visionary states. I think John Weir Perry referred to them. And before we start, by the way, my name is Jennifer Tull, and I grew up in a small town called Fairfield, Connecticut.
Very wealthy, very materialistic, especially if you lived on the wrong side of town, which we kind of did. I was from a working class family, very dysfunctional working class family. There was very little allowance, for individuality, at least certain types of individuality. If you didn't wear this, you were nothing. If you didn't have certain talents, you're pretty much put aside,
especially my family. The reason I'm giving you guys a background of who I was before I had my first episode
is because I think, and a lot of people feel, that the reason these episodes are happening, especially on such a big scale right now, is because our culture doesn't seem to allow for creative and spiritual flowering, especially in the very young. But what I was like when I was growing up, mostly, I was very shy. I was very unhappy, mostly, and I just had very few friends. I was one of those kids who mostly kept to themselves. And partly because it's just what my family taught me to do. I was taught that you were safer if you were invisible. So for most of my life, that's what I did. I just kind of hid, in the halls. I didn't look at anybody. I didn't speak to anybody at school. And unless it was to yell back at them, because I got bullied and harassed quite a lot. But that's what my life was mostly like. Just very lonely, very unhappy. Turn the cell phone off. Until I reached about 15 years old, and at which point I started experimenting with drugs, mostly marijuana and alcohol. And, especially because of, because the effect that it had, obviously, I just fell in love with this activity right away. I just lived to party, and I became known for that very quickly. That was pretty much who I thought I was. I was a partier. I didn't care. I didn't work. The rules didn't apply to me. I just wasn't the same as other people. And that was the way it was always going to be. I still earned reasonably average grades. So I also still consider myself pretty smart, a pretty good student. I listened to certain types of music, and only certain types of music. I refused to believe in God. I felt that was strictly for the weak, or soft-headed people. I wouldn't even talk about it. I didn't want to be seen talking about it. So the only people I felt, because I knew then that even my drug-taking friends, the people I party with, I knew they didn't care about me. I knew they wouldn't go out of their way to do anything to help me if I was in trouble. When I started having severe depression, and for me that was around the same time I started using, it was my teachers who stepped forward and helped me, always. Any sense of love and warmth I had in my life was from school. That was it. So because of this, I feel it's no coincidence that I had my first manic episode when I was 17 years old, because what was about to happen to me in 6 months was graduation. I had no ambitions for college, nor did I really have anyone around me other than my teachers. So, who cared? So I felt I was about to lose the only thing I had to live for, the only thing I had to look forward to in day to day. So it happened May of 2001. I was actually sent to a psychiatric hospital for 2 weeks. I don't want to say which hospital, because I really don't think they'd approve of me mentioning in this video. But it was your classic hospital, kind of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, one of those large-scale residential facilities. It was very expensive to go to, as my mother sometimes reminds me. And pretty much they heavily medicated all of us within a few days of us arriving in there. And they hadn't even come up with a formal diagnosis for me. You know, not really. They hadn't seen me for maybe an hour before they put me on antipsychotics, which pretty much rendered me comatose at an emotional level, you know. And I remember one of the nurses telling me how much better I was since I'd been put on the pills. They're like, "You're not swearing, you're not doing anything." I'm like, "I can barely stay awake." And it was ridiculous. But my experience in that hospital, as hospitals go, it wasn't too bad. But unfortunately, I did believe what I was being told, that they didn't come out and say what they thought the problem was then, that they kind of kept it hidden from me. They felt, I think I was too young to deal with it, but they medicated me. They gave me adult medications. And with that, I mean, the symptoms really didn't get any better. You know, I was still having trouble sleeping. The energy that was causing me to get up and walk around a lot, talk a lot, that energy was still there. What I did with that energy often changed from day to day. Some days I'd walk out in those days after I was released from the hospital. Some days I'd just take a walk across town, pretty impervious to the strain on my body. You know, I didn't care what other people thought of me so much, and that was markedly different from the person people were used to seeing. They were used to seeing someone who was shy and pretty easy to control and easy to keep in line. Not anymore. I was just living in this eternal now. I had no sense of time. I had no sense of boundary, meaning there was no difference between me and you. I felt that I was you, that you were me, and that I could see right through you. And in a way, where one of my convictions is that that made me feel that this experience was real and not just madness was, I actually was seeing into the minds of some of the people I interacted with when I was in the acute state. Not reading their thoughts per se, but guessing certain things about them that I couldn't have known because they were strangers. They were people I'd never met. I remember during one of my subsequent hospital stays, I walked up to a boy who was losing his temper, and I was trying to calm him down because I knew that he was about to be restrained, and I didn't want to see that happen to him. I knew it wasn't going to help him. So I walked up to him and said, "Don't you want to go home and play your drums?" You know, he goes, "Yeah." I'm like, "You play drums, don't you?" He goes, "Yes, I do." And that kind of thing happened to me a lot during these states, and along with synchronicities. Like I'd look up, I'd look up at something. I'd have a thought to be like, well, I wish I knew where I could find this, and then the thing would appear. Not literally appear, but I would just look in that right direction and find what I was looking for. It seemed more often I would think of someone, and then they would immediately contact me right afterwards, things like that. Or I'd open a book looking for something specific, and without looking at the table of contents, just open the book, look at it, and find what I was looking for. So even back then, at 17, having not read anything about spirituality other than a couple lines from the Bible that I didn't understand, I felt that my experience was very valuable and very spiritual. But since I had no one to talk to about it, I really didn't know what to do with it. My conviction wasn't really strong enough to defy my doctors at that age. I was still very, very frightened, very scared. And I didn't realize back then that there were other people in the world who felt like I did, that I wasn't mad and that I wasn't crazy. And more that I was more like just traumatized and very repressed in a way that I couldn't explain. You know, I didn't use words like spiritually repressed or spiritually anything. I knew nothing of spirit. I didn't want to know it for most of my life. So eventually, I stopped taking the meds that I'd been prescribed when I was in my early 20s, or late teens rather, around 20 years old. I just stopped taking them. I didn't think they were doing anything, but I continued to self-medicate with marijuana and alcohol very heavily up till a year and a half ago. And I consider it all medication because my body doesn't care if the drugging is legal or illegal because the intent is to suppress feelings. So I call it all medication. The thing was, sorry, I'm a little nervous. I'm tripping over my words here. I want to just fast forward to, because I had a few more experiences like this
over the years until I was able to suppress it completely with the drugs. And then something happened to me in 2007 where I tried to come off all drugs myself. And of course, what happened
was I had a relapse, pretty much a relapse of all the symptoms. But this time, I had certain knowledge and certain resources that I didn't have available to me the first time. I had friends who were into certain healing practices that I hadn't known about before, such as Reiki, energy work, and pretty much they were, for lack of better words, they're an offbeat crowd. They're a very offbeat crowd. A lot of people say that we're a bunch of crazy artists. New age is a term I hear a lot that I don't care much for because there's nothing new about these practices at all, except that more people are just gathering to discuss them. So when I pretty much went manic this time, I did wind up getting some light medication for it, but what I also got was an environment that allowed me to talk about what I was feeling and what I was remembering. Because I had to, during that last episode, where I feel I was kind of being invited to experience my feelings, I re-experienced some of the most terrifying memories that I have. And later, my parents confirmed that the things I was remembering really did happen, and that they were praying that I had forgotten them, but I hadn't. Molestation, possibly attempted rape that happened very early in my life, like before 3 years old. And I didn't actually see the visions of these things happening to me, but I actually felt it. Like at one point, when I was at my friend Karen's house, when I was sitting in a dark room, just staring at a chink of light under the door, I remember feeling a tremendous weight pressing down against my chest and on my throat as though it were trying to silence me. And it took a lot of effort to just pretty much summon the light, just visualize the light in my hands and push this thing off, whatever it was. And I walked out of that room, and I don't remember if I told Karen what had just happened to me, but she asked me if I needed a hug, and she gave me one. And that night, that was after having had trouble sleeping for a good 2 weeks. That night I slept well for the first time since that episode had begun, a week and a half before that, or 2 weeks. I was able to stay asleep for about 7 hours, which hadn't occurred before. So pretty much it was just a lot of emotional baggage that needed to be jettisoned, and I couldn't have done it without my friends around me. I could not have done this by myself. I don't think anyone can, or very few people can, especially if the trauma was severe and happened when the person was very young. And this I found out from talking to other people who have had the same experience. And come to find out, drugs aren't necessary. A person doesn't need to experiment with drugs heavily to have these experiences. They actually happen to people who are, pretty much goody two-shoes. People who've never experimented in their lives, who are doing everything they're told, and try to keep healthy and stay on the straight and narrow. This can happen to anyone. And the reason for it being, as I understand it, is that the ego collapses when a person is in a state of full psychosis. Ego completely collapses. Now, if you think of the ego in the context of the way Stan Groff and Ken Wilber talk about it, the ego is pretty much who we think we are. It's everything we think about ourselves and the rest of the world, our judgments, seeing things as good or bad, that comes from our ego. And for me, like say my profession, that even now I have a hard time letting go of, that's probably because it comprises a big part of my ego. I enjoy doing stage work. It's fun, and I feel it kind of sets me apart from other people who work 9-to-5 jobs. I enjoy that. Sometimes to the detriment of my financial situation. But it's a big part of what comprises my ego. It's like my shell. But when that is taken away from someone, it could be very, very frightening, because the ego has a function. It helps us. It helps ground us. It helps us interact with other people and obey social mores so that we don't make other people feel uncomfortable. So when the ego collapses, people need support. They need people to literally co-pilot them through this, just like an acid trip, because it's people who studied acid, LSD, and mushroom, any hallucinogenic trips have found that the hallucinations aren't caused by the drugs themselves. They're caused by what the drugs do, which is eliminate your ego, take it away. Be like, okay, when that happens, most people don't know who they are anymore. They just don't see the boundary between them and the rest of the world. So for me, at one point, I felt just one with everything. I felt like I had all the answers I needed. I felt like I had nothing to fear. And that scared my friends a little bit, because I think, especially some of the friends that are here today, they felt that I might, lose my bearings while I was on one of my walks and get hit by a car. And luckily that didn't happen, but I can see where it could have, because I was a little, just like the first time, I was impervious to my body's needs and might have pushed it a little harder than I should have. But luckily, I had a lot of friends who knew what was happening to me, and they kept calling me and checking in on me and making sure I wasn't doing anything too reckless. But in short, eventually the experience subsided. All in all, for me to return to a normal functioning state, it took about 2.5 to 3 months. And during which time I went to work as little as I could. And as a stagehand, I could get away with that because we're on call and we're not required to take the labor calls. We can refuse if we want. And I didn't tell my boss the truth, obviously. I'm not going to tell him I'm going through a visionary experience and I can't come to work. I just made some BS excuse. Luckily, it happened in the summer. And in a way, I kind of timed it that way. I knew what was going to happen to me when I took myself off the drugs. So I timed it to happen in the summertime when I knew that the work was most sparse. That's a dead season for us, for most people down here in Florida, where I'm living now. But I'm going to take a little break up here, and because I want to take a moment, I want to hear from someone who witnessed that last experience, the one whose house I stayed at, who just gave me the kind of support that I needed. Karen?
Hi, my name is Karen Lohman, and I'm honored to be here, and really happy and supportive of my friend Jen Toth here, and really just happy that in your journey of where you've come, and I feel like it's been full circle. So my experiences have been that when you look at people that experience other experiences and what other people are at the same time, which appear to be in the same reality, and some people would say that they're crazy or tripping, if you will, or not really of this reality. People forget that there are many other dimensions that we are living in, and that just because we cannot see beyond what is immediately put in front of us doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. That would be like, there's blood running through our veins right now, but you can't see it right now. We could cut our arm and then we could see it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist before we cut our arm. That's one of the things. And many people, I believe, are tapped into have experiences, either bring them with us from biological tap-in, psychologically, spiritually connected to occurrences that have happened, reliving those things that happened before now. In string theory, really they're just so minutely apart that it's, for some people, whatever happened is happening now, and other people, just, they don't see that. They only see the here and now. So, my experiences and my challenges were is that even though theoretically I know these things, I had not really run into somebody that was as close to me as you were and experiencing that. And the best that I felt like that I could do for you is to reassure you that you are safe in the space that you were in at that time, and that there was going to be no harm done to you. And that if you wanted to talk about what had happened or what you felt like was happening at that time, then to talk about it so that we might be able to kind of shine some light on a different ending or a different understanding of what your perceptions were at that time. And I felt like that being able to give you a hug and you being open to that too kind of helped ground you in this reality. And I agree that there is so many souls that are coming into this world right now are very attuned, more attuned than I believe they have been in a long time. And there's a harder integration of understanding this world because I'm just going to say it, it's ass backwards. Okay. We are brought up not to foster our own creativity. We're not honored as creators and we are creators. We are looked upon as doers, human doers rather than human beings. And there's no emphasis on being. There's no emphasis on creating. It's what can you do for us, if you will, in our construct. And we really don't want your input. We just want you to do what we want you to do. So when you have people that are very much connected to the creative process, to understanding we as human beings are social creatures. I think that we don't get touched enough. When I say we don't get touched enough, let me emphasize, we don't get touched in a very positive, loving, helpful, connective way. There are so many things that are out there that, I honestly don't understand why there is rape happening. I don't understand why that happens in this world. Period. I don't understand molestation. I don't understand forcing someone upon somebody else against their will. That has got to change. It has to. We are destroying ourselves. So for me to extend a hug to you was very natural, normal for me. And we need to remember to connect with one another many more times than what we're doing on a daily basis. Openly, freely, and a lot of times too, and I'm talking about myself here, when I get stressed out, which is more times than not lately, is that, we all tend to kind of shut down. And we shut down, we're trying to, I guess, protect ourselves because we don't know where we're at. We clench up, exactly, Jen. We clench up, and so it's harder for even us in that state to reach out to somebody else that may be hurting, as well as for them, somebody else, to reach out to us because we're so closed off. So really, at this point in time, when we are stressed out, we really need to remember that we need to open ourselves up, and we need to be able to be in a space to be able to connect and to ask for help. I'm working on that. I'm bad about that. I have been bad about that. But I have been bad about that. I'm not doing that anymore. So, in opening up, and, I reminded someone through a Facebook test just a few minutes ago that the universe always provides to us, always has what we need right in this moment. Always. But we just need to open our scope just a little bit to be able to see it if we don't see it. So we're all in a process and a journey of becoming better. And there are challenging times with that. We have to forgive ourselves when we've done wrong. We have to forgive others when I say do wrong, when, there's been, what's that? Yeah, when you hurt someone, and there's a two-step forgiveness process. There's a forgiveness for yourself as well as forgiving the other person, depending, no matter what's happening, So, yeah, and that's letting go, exactly. So, many people have brought up in a home that doesn't hug. Believe it or not, I grew up in a home that didn't hug, and I'm the one that started hugging. I can't imagine life without hugs now. Because when you also hug a person, and I hug on the right side, which is my right side, their left side, because then hearts connect. And that's part of the whole process about connecting. Exactly. So what's really nice is that when people hug on the other side, that means you get two hugs because you still have to hug on the other side. And I've watched your transformation grow. I've also witnessed where, and I was not a part of this, and I, in fact, discouraged it, but I didn't have really control over the situation, is that when you had gone through a manic episode, I think it was after the situation that you had talked about being at my home, that they had picked you up and put you in a facility, which these facilities don't do anything. Yes, exactly. No touching is allowed. It's a sterile, I say sterile but dirty environment. There are no books that you can read. There's no plants. There's no calming music. The TV is pumped in. You have basically, it's a holding cell, if you will, before you would, something similar to what you would find almost in a jail cell. And this is supposed to be a mental health facility to help and foster and comfort someone in a situation where they're apparently not aware of reality at that time. The system that we have is not at all about helping people through and helping understanding. It's more about what kind of drugs we put you on, and if you lash out in what their definitive terms are, then they will literally throw you down, strap you down, and shoot you up with stuff. And so you can't talk. And Jen's not the only one that I've heard about that. I mean, people have gone through that and given Haldol. They can't even speak. They can't even get the words out of their mouth. And it's pretty intense. So we really have to understand that, some of these people have gifts that would help us understand more of what reality really is, but we're not allowing that to happen.
Manic episodes. what approach works versus what does not. Now, what Karen said was very true. In these institutions, physical contact of any kind is not allowed, no matter what the intent is behind it. Unless the intent is to restrain you, and they don't need much provocation to restrain you. You could just be raising your voice a little too much or just talking too much. And in my case, I was thrown on the bed in front of 5 strangers. I had my pants pulled down, and I had a needle shoved in my butt, full of things that I didn't know. It was probably an antipsychotic. I think it was Geodon that they gave me. But it just knocked me out. That's all it did. But I knew one woman in that same hospital who had had that injection done to her 12 times, and she'd only been there 2 weeks. So what we were dealing with was... it was brutal. I mean, I know Eleanor Roosevelt helped take us a long way when her husband was president, because in her day, most of people like us were treated like animals. They were chained to the walls in pretty much dungeon-like environments and treated like they were criminals. And it was her who pretty much said that they need to be treated more like patients and with compassion. But it was still Freudian-based psychiatry that drove the policies that govern these places. And I feel that on an emotional and spiritual level, we're no further than we were in the turn of the century. Not really. Honestly, the environments they create are very fear-based. The people in there, most of them are terrified. They're lonely. And they just don't know what's going to happen to them or how the world's going to receive them when they are eventually released. And for that reason, a lot of people deliberately keep acting crazy, even if they are recovered, because they don't want to go back out into the world. They're not prepared for it. And it's really sad truth. But on the good side, the reality is that not everybody who's been in the field of psychiatry thinks that way. There were certain pioneers, like John Weir Perry, Stan Groff, who believe that these visionary states can be very beneficial to people if they're allowed to just be carried through to their conclusion, particularly if the person is very young and they're going through their first experiences. These guys pretty much feel that medication does more harm than good, that other causes need to be ruled out first, like nutritional, heavy drug use, which they didn't really ask about before they gave me more drugs, which I find kind of interesting. And pretty much there needs to be more of a multidimensional approach to what is definitely a multidimensional problem with a lot of causes. And it's interesting to note that there is no conclusive proof, no satisfactory proof that any mental problem is caused by chemical imbalance. I feel chemical imbalance can occur over time as a result of poor lifestyle habits or as a result of always being in a fear state, because I know that does change our body's chemistry, and I feel that's why people who are stressed a lot tend to get sick more. It's because their resistance is low, because their bodies aren't working the way they were built to work. But I feel generally people, especially in America here, but in the Western world in general, a lot of our basic needs are just not being met. Spiritual and emotional, yeah, definitely. How many times a day do I go out, just to any public place, and I see kids with their mother. Their mother's just sitting there talking on a cell phone, not even looking at her kids. There's not much interaction going on there. The kids are being raised, I know I was, raised by the television. There just wasn't much connection going on. That's something that is learned. The desire, the need for connection is there, but knowing how to do it and meet that need has to be taught, and I just don't think it's happening. I mean, how many businesses are now open on Sundays? That used to be the Sabbath day, used to be the day everyone went to church and kept their spiritual lives in order. It's just not considered a priority anymore. It's considered a luxury. And I feel it's very unfortunate. I'm not saying everybody who goes to church is necessarily mentally well, but I feel the opportunity to do spiritual activities, connect with others spiritually. I feel the opportunity is a necessity. I don't feel it's a luxury, reserved only for the super rich or for people who are just happen to have that schedule. I still feel most businesses ought to be closed on Sundays now. It's like, get back to that. But anyhow, I'd like to refer to the work of a person who was a very big help to me in the last episode I had in '97. He helped me get through the last of it, and he's since been kind of watching my progress. I give him an email every now and then. The man's name is Sean Blackwell, and when he was 30 years old, back in '96, he had an episode very similar to mine, and it was his first one he's ever had. So Sean was a very big help to me, very good friend of mine, and I owe a heck of a lot to him and the research and work that he did. So but to conclude, for people who want to do what I did and get off the medications, I have a couple of don'ts. Don't try to do it by yourself. Don't try to do it all at once. One thing at a time. Most people have a lot of addictions that they have, for example, whether it's to certain foods, certain people, places, or things. Doesn't even have to be mind-altering drugs. Whatever it is you feel you need to give up in order to recover, don't try to do it all at once or by yourself, because believe me, that will probably lead you to the hospital and really won't get you very far. The sensible thing to do, first thing is, if you are an addict or an alcoholic, check yourself into rehab. That's the only thing I would recommend going to hospital for, just because the addiction is chemical. That problem is chemical, and the withdrawal can get very, very ugly, especially if you were a heavy drinker. And if you're going through delirium tremens, you're going to need medical attention. So, but for cases that don't involve drugs, and if for those who are on medications now, all the same, to get off them, a lot of support will be necessary. A lot of research will be necessary, and a lot of work for those who need it, for those who know they've been through trauma or are dealing with a lot of blocks. A life coach, a psychologist, or a good therapist, especially one who embraces the spiritual aspect of life, can be very helpful. A lot of them, even outside the transpersonal field, which is difficult for most people to afford. Like those therapists that you find in spiritual organizations, like I'm seeing one myself who's actually a volunteer, and she sees me for little or no compensation because it's a charitable organization. If you can get someone like that who takes the spiritual into account, chances are you will be able to talk about these experiences, no holds barred, and they won't judge you or look at you in any negative way, so long as you're not doing anything to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else. That's definitely a big help, because before the meds are no longer necessary, for me, before I could get off them, I had to start working through some of the things that got me on those meds in the first place. For me, a lot of the blocks involved trust in other people. They involved fear, caused mostly by my history, by how I'd been treated in the past. Mostly I was just shutting people out and not allowing anyone to get near me. But at the same time, I was very lonely, just didn't know how to connect with people. I had to learn how to connect with others again and accept their love and their affection. And so to start fulfilling that need, I also had to confront fears that I had. Besides that, phobias. Like, for example, I used to have a fear of the public bus. I wouldn't take the bus anywhere. I would only use my bicycle or my feet, which was very limiting for me. It limited where I could go and what I could do. But I needed a lot of support. I needed to be validated, and I just needed to be loved, pretty much to get through it all. And once that happens, You built a solid foundation. Nutritional testing also, as I would highly recommend, because in general the American diet is pretty bad, and most people don't eat as well as they ought to, and I think a lot of us underestimate what that can do to our mental and emotional processing. Okay, so rule out nutritional deficiencies, definitely, and monitor your activity levels. Like, even if you don't feel like getting out of bed, do it anyway. Get up, go for a walk, do something to ground yourself every day, if only to remind you that we're part of nature and that we're not alone, no matter where we are. Even if we're in a town where we don't know anybody yet, we're never alone, period. Important thing to remember. And believe in yourself, because a great number of people who aren't aware of this can get off their meds. They can live much fuller and more satisfying lives. We can live with integrity and authenticity that we never knew we were capable of before, because our ego is just consuming all of our actions and all of our decisions. So much for staying invisible. Okay, I think it's time for people like anyone who needs to heal. I think we've had enough invisibility. We're not second-class citizens. We are not animals. I think a lot of us actually have the potential to become healers ourselves once we've successfully healed. So wherever you are on the journey, keep going. Even though sometimes you might feel you can't see what's ahead of you. So that's all I got. And the Latin phrase I learned recently comes to mind. Beate quorum via integra est. That means blessed are those who go the way of integrity. That's a good one to keep in your pocket. So, thank you. Peace out.